So the topic of conversation, guys. KB.
Preach, Mr. Lofton. You know what I mean, Nate. I get fired up about this.
Yeah, we've been fired up all year about this. Now, it's been 2 years. He's been excluded twice now. There's been a lot of guys that have got in, and in my opinion, the receivers that are in are very deserving. Now, I can bore you with numbers, and maybe I'll dive into those a little bit later. But let me tell you about the eye test and what it means to me. When I played, there were certain guys that I looked at, and initially, they were just mentors, big brothers, the OGs, as I like to call them, at the wide receiver position. That included Chad Johnson, Steve Smith Sr., T.O. Steve Smith Sr., T.O., they went on to have glorious careers, and some would say Hall of Fame careers. But when you watched T.O. and you watched him play, you knew right out the gate he was a living legend in the game, head and shoulders above the competition. All the receivers that he played with, he was the #1 guy. And not only was the guy that we looked at as #1, but went out there and put up #1 numbers. We can have this argument all day about what type of teammate he was. I can care less about that because there's Hall of Famers that are on their list. They weren't the best teammates, but they were competitive and they were winners. And you're going to see that throughout the rest of the existence of the NFL. There's going to be guys that are going to be on teams that will rub people the wrong way because they just want to win that bad. Here's a list of guys that I saw in the same light as T.O. that if a ring validated their career, they would undoubtedly be Hall of Famers. Steve Smith Sr., Larry Fitzgerald, Jason Witten, Phillip Rivers. T.O. falls in that list. Now, if he had a ring, I don't think there'd be a question. And that's the frustrating part. Yeah, it's coming from a guy that doesn't have a ring, but his numbers speak so loudly. So I just can't fathom why he is not in the Hall of Fame.
Schrager, give me some of these nuts and bolts. I know you deal with this.
You know, I talk with David Baker, the president of the Hall of Fame. You know, I speak with a lot of the voters. And now this year, the process was a little different. James Lofton, the guy you just heard, was in the room. He's a Hall of Fame voter. So is Dan Fouts. It's the first time they've had player representatives. So I look to James Lofton, who's an all-time great, an NFL Pro Football Hall of Famer. Going on the Rich Eisen show and making the case is all good and well. You need to convince the guys in the room, because it doesn't matter what the public thinks. It doesn't matter.
But he's only one voice, Peter.
His voice now is very valued. He's the player voice. So if he thinks that these voters, and first of all, the guys in the room, we've talked about this. It is not a young room. This is your 60-year-olds, your 70-year-olds. These are writers, the Hall of Fame writers, who have been doing this almost like Supreme Court justices. It's not a young room, so you're not talking to people who necessarily could say, oh, who cares? They care about integrity. They care about the way you are as a teammate. To them, it's not Hall of Fame numbers, it's what the Hall of Fame represents. So I looked at James Lofton, I looked at Dan Fouts, looked at those. As evangelists, you need to convince those voters that, yes, it doesn't matter about all the stuff that you're reading about. I played the game. The Nate stuff, where it says, hey, I know who was on the list. But for those wondering, what did he do so bad anyway? I think you forget just how toxic a teammate he was.
Really?
So for these voters, let's go to this. This is while he's on the Philadelphia Eagles. He does an interview with ESPN. Let's toss to the video here. This is while he is a current player on the Eagles. They ask him about his quarterback. Let's go to it.
He's a guy, obviously, a number of commentators who will say he's a warrior. He's played with injuries. You know, I just feel like we'll probably be in a better situation.
Talking about Donovan McNabb, his teammate, his quarterback. During the season, we're in a better situation with Brett Favre as our quarterback.
It's dumb.
How dumb? I mean, what kind of teammate? Okay, you do remember this? The Eagles, they go to the Super Bowl. They have this amazing year. The following offseason, he's in the sit-up, doing the sit-ups. This is what people do remember, Nate. So when you say the ring doesn't matter, I don't think if he has a ring, it doesn't even matter at this point. I think for Terrell Owens, people look at him as a guy who kept teams back from winning that next one. Whether or not that's true or not, and Kyle, you could tear it apart, it is on those in that room. It is on the voters who believe that he is a Hall of Famer. The Nate Burlesons, the James Loftons, the several writers, the Mike Silvers, these guys who come out and say, of course he's a Hall of Famer. I mean, look at this stunt, guys.
This is theatrics. It's simple little nonsense and personality for the media.
I think he belongs.
I know you do, and I know you're just making the case.
I'm making the case.
I don't care if he swung on Donovan.
Yeah, you're giving the reason.
I'm explaining to you for all the numbers why
this is so petty. This is stupid thing in the driveway. It was comical. It was funny. The idea, okay, if he was like a fringe guy, he was a 75 touchdown guy like James Lofton. Okay, I got it. Maybe that's compelling. There's nothing fringe about this. This is Barry Sanders of receivers. This is Dan Marino of receivers, and they're keeping him out. And I think it's embarrassing for the Hall of Fame. I think it's embarrassing for those voters. If you're a fan and you're saying, maybe I want to go to Canton. I want to visit this place I've heard so much about, the sacred ground. Terrell Owens isn't in? What is this? What are we talking about here? This is not even Rush didn't get in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. This is like the Stones did not get in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. It is an issue of credibility, and these old guys, they're going to keep punishing. We know he's going to get in, right? He's going to get in eventually. So what is this? Is just he's in timeout for a couple of years. It's so petty. It's so personal. Yeah. And the thing about Favre, of course, it's a dumb comment. Yeah. It's not a keep Terrell Owens out of the Hall of Fame comment. Who cares? Yeah. Did he literally light the locker room on fire? I don't even care if he did, Nate. It's so stupid. I get so mad.
No, I hear you. And I agree. When we're not talking about off-the-field issues as in trouble with the law, gambling on games.
Nothing.
He's not in the casinos in Vegas, betting on the Super Bowl. This is a guy that had issues on the field and then in the locker room. Yeah, was he a bad teammate at times? Cool. Was he theatrical at times? Yeah, cool. But that's not a reason to keep him out. The man is third in receiving touchdowns. Third. He's second in yards. Talking about top 5 in the most important categories for a wide receiver.
Craziest thing is, guys, this was the year for him to get in because you look at that class and nothing against the guys who did get in, but you got a kicker, Morton Anderson, who got in. You got Jason Taylor as a first ballot guy. I don't think everyone saw that happening. And now next year you have Brian Urlacher, Ray Lewis, Rondé Barber, Randy Moss, Steve Hutchinson, Richard Seymour. They're all about. So there were slots to be taken this year. When you've got a kicker going into the Hall of Fame, you could easily say, okay, Terrell Owens made more of an impact on the sport than a kicker, no matter who it is. Next year, you've got guys who you might make the argument had even more of an impact than T.O.
Is Randy Moss getting in? Because he had teams that ran through him. He said, I play when I want to play. That's kind of the stuff we're talking about T.O., right? I mean, so is Randy Moss, maybe the greatest receiver ever, going to have to wait? By the T.O. rules, he should. That's where we are in this thing. It is ridiculous, and this should be something we're all very proud of. It should be our proudest thing, the Hall of Fame, and I think it's become a sham.
And let me just throw a little salt bay on here for the numbers. He led the NFL 3 different times, 2001, 2002, 2006. And here's a notable player that has fewer yards than T.O. Tim Brown, Marvin Harrison, James Lofton, Chris Carter, Andre Reed, Steve Largent, Michael Irvin, all Hall of Famers,
all in.
All deserving Hall of Famers, but less yards than T.O.